Welcome to Closer to Venus. I'm Johnny Burke. Today's guest is Scarlet Porretta. She is a clairaudient medium, Reiki master, and manifestation coach. Today, we will be talking about how she delivers messages from spirit and loved ones from the other side. Scarlet, welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's very exciting to be on your podcast.
Excellent.
I have to say, my family is a huge fan. We've been listening, especially some of the more interesting stuff that you do.
You admit that.
I do admit it. And I was actually quite excited when you had reached out to me. So thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. So you are a clairaudient medium. When did you discover that you had your intuitive gifts?
I'm so glad that you asked that. I was such a young girl. I don't remember the exact age. If I had to put an age on it, it would be about 4 years old. Most of my strange experiences happened when I was under 5 years old. And as a child, you don't even realize I'm intuitive or I'm a medium. You don't realize they're just frightening situations. And I recall seeing people at the foot of my bed. It was so strange in the middle of the night. I have great parents. When they heard me in distress, they'd come in. That individual at the foot of my bed, I could see them as clearly as I could see my parents. And so at that point, I started realizing that there was something different about me.
One of the things I've noticed with any kind of medium, almost every single person reports that they were able to see spirits at an early age. I remember reading a book about Kim Russo, who's very well known. And
yes,
she had the same type of experience where, like you said, they were literally at the foot of her bed. A lot of people associate psychic mediums with clairvoyance, right? But you are a clairaudient medium. So what are the chief differences?
I think it's almost now become a word that people use for describing mediums, the marketing side of things. The truth of the matter is anybody who is a medium will be receiving information in a variety of different ways. Clairaudient is one of them, claircognizance, clairempathy, clairsent. I can go on. There's a whole number of senses that we pick up. I am predominantly clairaudient. What that means is I hear sounds, I hear words, noise, voices, hence Scarlet's whispers. And it's very different from clairvoyant because clairvoyants typically see things. They'll see symbols or images or visions. They get vivid dreams. They can see energy around people. Clairaudients are people who are musically inclined, typically. Sometimes people will be driving, they're on their way to the office, and then they hear a voice say, "Take the next exit." And then they arrive to their office and they realize something saved them from a terrible accident. So you hear things, and that's what I predominantly do. I do hear the other senses as well, but predominantly I hear whispers. Can get a little freaky at times.
Okay, so it would make sense. Musicians can be clairaudient because they practice and they try to write songs. They can kind of hear. I remember Axl from Guns N' Roses in a very early interview was saying how sometimes he gets his best ideas when he's like brushing his teeth, something completely random. But on the subject of clairaudience, I interviewed a woman recently who wrote books based on her clairaudient skills, but she said she's not a medium. Is it possible to be clairaudient and not be a medium?
I have difficulty with that because you're channeling and she's not recognizing where the information is coming from. And I think every medium is going to be a little bit different. Some mediums will pick up information from their own guides. Some mediums will pick up information from angels. Some mediums will pick up information from other spirit guides. Everyone's a little bit different. Like I remember when I was working out at the gym pre-COVID, of course, I noticed the gym had about 5 different fitness trainers, and one fitness trainer would specialize in weight loss. Another one would specialize in bodybuilding. Another one was in rehabilitation from physical injuries. But they're all fitness trainers. It is no different than mediums. This was my aha moment that I had, Johnny. Mediums are the same way. Psychics are the same way. Intuitives are the same way. We all have an ability, but we all are doing it just a little bit different. Our specialty, our calling is a little different.
Since you brought that up, channeling. I actually have a relative. Her name is Maria. I'm not going to mention her last name because she might be embarrassed. She has had several dreams of family members and friends who have passed, and some of them have actually telepathically given her messages about some of the people that are living. And she recently went to go see a psychic, and the psychic told Maria that you are a medium.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It certainly does.
I think it's important for people to be aware of this type of thing because whether you want to call it medium, empath, intuitive, it happens a lot more than we realize. And going back to the childhood experiences, you don't really know what to think of it then until you get older, and then you have an aha moment like, oh, that's what it was.
That's what it was.
So we know that many people are skeptical about mediums. What kind of examples can you give us about evidential mediumship in your practice and what that means for our listeners?
No, it makes sense. Listen, I'm skeptical too. I really respect those that are skeptical because they are striving to understand this no different than anybody else. They're striving. They want some information. They want something concrete. You know, this realm, we want things that are tangible. Our big challenge is, though, the stuff that I do, none of it is tangible. So it's difficult. I hope one day that science will be able to validate a little bit deeper for us. But when it comes to evidence, I love doing paranormal investigations. Sometimes I do it professionally, sometimes I do it for fun. And when I say I do it for fun, I say that tongue in cheek, of course, because I'm always looking for evidence myself. How is this happening? Why is it happening? There have been a couple of incidences. My very first fascinating experience was I was invited to do a paranormal investigation at someone's home. We had the equipment running, the night vision cameras, the EVPs are recording, things like that. We're sitting in the basement of this place, and it's myself, my better half, and two friends of ours who are avid professional paranormal investigators, and we're sitting in the dark having casual conversation about what we're feeling and what's happening. Out of the blue, I hear a whistle. So I hear this whistle, and one of the other gals, she piped up. She says, you know what? I thought I heard something in that direction as well. Well, the best part is, after reviewing the EVPs from the evening, it actually came out. So what you hear is the whistle. It's just a very faint whistle. And then you hear me say, oh my goodness, did you hear that? Did you hear that whistle? You could hear the whistle that I heard. And that to me was like, oh my goodness, that was a great validation for me, because when you're hearing these whispers, it happens all the time. This is not something that necessarily shuts off, you know? So it's one of those things where sometimes you wonder, what was I hearing? Another time, this actually happened last Halloween. You know, here in Ontario, we were on lockdown, and a lot of my clients were disappointed that Halloween had locked us down. So we did a live paranormal investigation via Zoom. And so I had an audience, and we had equipment, and everybody could see what was happening on the equipment. And one of my audience members, who happened to be also a very good client of mine, we were talking about her mother. And what was incredible is I could feel this presence move into the room. Like, I hear the energy. It's so bizarre. I hear this energy moving in. And so now my spidey senses are heightened, and I'm paying closer attention to that energy. And then suddenly I see this big orb. Johnny, I've never seen anything like it before, that big. And it was bright, and it was maybe about 6 inches in diameter. And it floats in. It takes a look at the camera. It sits in front of the camera as if to say hello to everybody. It pauses there, and then it darts right past me. And so it comes in. You can see my face on the camera. You can see my face being, you know, a little inquisitive about it. And then I'm gasping because I see this. And as I go to say, can anybody else see this? It darts past me. The audience gasped. So not only did others witness it, but we caught the whole thing on camera, and you could literally see it float in. So even though it wasn't visible at that point, you could see that I'm reacting.
It's amazing that you mentioned that. A lot of us are familiar with the Netflix show Surviving Death, and there was a segment on that type of phenomena, orbs and flashes of light, which you couldn't see it at the moment, but I think it required a certain type of film. And another segment where a lot of this took place back when everybody had Polaroids, and because of the certain type of film, it showed up. But when they switched to a different type of film, that light did not show up. But you're saying that you were able to see it on the video playback?
Yeah, and at one point we could actually see it. Like, I was not the only person that was seeing it when it floated in front of the camera and appeared, like almost to say hello to everyone. It was absolutely fascinating. It was absolutely fascinating.
Incredible. Right. Tell us a little bit about your experiences with angels, spirit guides, and guardian angels, and those entities that help with the messaging and the connection in your work.
In my work, when I came into this, I came into it maybe a little bit naive and hoping, of course, that everything was white light. Having this notion that whatever is communicating with us is spirit, you know, and spirit is other human beings who have passed on. That's not always the case. Sometimes we're receiving information from our loved ones on the other side. Sometimes they are more of the divine nature. And sometimes their entities are lower vibrational beings of any kind. And of course, then there's ghosts. We wonder what's the difference between. And then ghosts is even broken down. Like a ghost is someone who has remained stuck in a particular location that they passed away. Either they don't recognize that they've passed away, or there's unfinished business. So they're sticking to that particular location. And then the side of that is where a ghost is, it's just residual energy. So in other words, if an individual, walked through their front entrance over their lifetime, like thousands of times, even though that front door is now a solid wall, you will still see that activity coming and going as if it was still a front door. So that is more what is called residual energy. So there are different types of things that you can pick up. Predominantly, I work with spirit and spirit guides.
When you say spirit and spirit guides, spirit is it God? Is it source? Is it the Akashic Records? Is it the quantum realm? Or are all those terms basically describing the same entity?
In some cases, they are describing the same entities, and in others, there are different creatures out there. Some talk about channeling friendly aliens, things like that. In my work, if I have to do this, I set boundaries, quite honestly. When I'm reading someone, I'm channeling, I strictly want to speak to their spirit guides, any guardian angels, and their loved ones on the other side. So I've set those boundaries. That doesn't mean that I'm not able to channel other things. It's just in a sitting, that's what I'm requesting, because otherwise you can get all kinds of strange things. You got to be really, really careful. You got to protect yourself, your space, protect yourself internally, externally. By doing that, you protect the individual that you're reading as well. It can get tricky. It can get interesting, let me tell you.
I've heard that several times before about protecting yourself and the people around you. Whether people are going into reading or just going about their daily rituals, what's a good way for us to protect ourselves?
It's going to be one that people don't want to hear, but eating well. If you're eating high vibrational food versus low vibrational food, higher vibrational food, of course, is fresh vegetables, fresh fruit, food that's from the earth and from the sun and the air. The minute that it starts becoming man-made, we got to be very, very careful of how the vibration is lowering. And then, of course, recreational drugs or alcohol. These are things that you definitely want to stay away from prior to doing anything paranormal, whether you're going in for a reading, whether you want to play with your tarot cards, or you're going to have some fun with your friends and go check out a haunted location. You got to be very, very careful. Anytime you do anything, even caffeine, believe it or not, anything that will alter your natural state, it actually lowers your aura, your energy field, and it allows lower vibrational entities to, what I call, infect your being.
When you make contact with a past loved one for the sitter, how do you know it's really them and not just some random spirit, speaking of which?
Yeah, it's one thing that I take with responsibility as I feel and hear someone enter my space. I have this quiet conversation with them in my mind's eye and I ask for validation. And for me, validation will come in a number of ways. It'll be in their personality traits, whether they're funny or not. It'll be in the way that they passed away, how it felt, or an illness or an accident. They will validate something that my sitter will understand and is not necessarily common. You see some readers out there and they'll say, oh, I see someone who's coming in with the letter M or J. Well, if you do any research, you'll recognize the majority of names start with either an M or a J. So it's a hit or miss,
Yeah.
I don't validate like that. And as a matter of fact, I really kind of suck at actually guessing names. I'll get the sounds of the names, but they don't show me because I'm clairaudient. But I'll pick up sounds with respect to their name. But it's stuff that will be personal to the person that I'm reading.
So you're basically asking whoever comes through, can you please give me some validation? Mm-hmm. Interesting. That I've never heard before, but that does make a lot of sense.
Sometimes I need to actually vocally tell them to calm down. Most of the conversation happens in my mind's eye, but if I find that sometimes they're getting a little, I'm like, okay, take it easy. I hear that message. We're going to respect it, but I just need you to settle down just for a moment.
So between the validation, the evidential mediumship, and mediums being certified, which we haven't talked about yet.
Right.
Those are some really good pieces for people to understand, because I've talked to several mediums that actually went through programs like that. The Forever Family Foundation is one that I know of, but every time someone tells me about certification, the procedure is exactly the same. They're given 5 back-to-back Skype interviews, and then the organization who's doing the oversight will then interview the sitters and ask them several questions. From what I've heard is that most mediums, when they go through these programs, most don't make it.
Yeah, and I can understand that too. And it might not be that they're necessarily not a good medium. Maybe they just still need time to develop. That can be the case with someone who's just testing out or coming into that awareness. I like what you're saying, and I'm so glad that you're raising that issue, because I believe it's important to deal with a reputable medium, because otherwise most people that come to us, they're in a state of heartbreak. And so they're vulnerable. They can be taken advantage of, unfortunately. So you just want to look out for a few things. So one thing, you want to look out for someone who is certified. You want to look out for someone who is reputable if they're not certified. Truthfully, I myself am not actually certified, but I have been tested.
It's pretty much the same.
Yeah.
It's the same process.
Yes, and it is. And I know here in Canada, we don't necessarily have certification courses, or it's not as prevalent. But I know in the States, there are a lot of courses to get that certification. But I have been tested by what we call elders, where I have done readings for them, and my accuracy was tested. And then let me tell you too, Johnny, when I'm doing my audience readings, that's the biggest test ever, because you're in front of a bunch of people staring at you, and you've got to be able to validate in front of a whole bunch of people,
And if you're not doing it, word's going to get out
very
pretty quickly. Marketing 101.
Yeah.
A good experience versus a bad experience. That person that had a bad experience is going to tell 4 times as many people.
It's so true. And I just want to add too, for our listeners out there, if a medium is advertising things like 100% accuracy, I'm sorry, none of us are going to be 100% accurate, because it depends on spirit. I remember doing an audience reading, and there was a lady in the audience, and I kept being drawn to her. And then all of a sudden, I would have blank. And I would look at her and I would say, I know that there's a message for you. It's just as soon as I come to you, I drop blank. And it happened a couple of times during that audience reading. I really felt foolish, I have to be honest. I felt badly for this lady who badly wanted to hear from someone. She came to me personally, like one-on-one privately. And as soon as she sat down, her husband wouldn't stop talking. And I looked at her, I said, oh my God, your husband's here and he's saying this and he's saying that. And she said, well, that's who I really wanted to hear from in the audience. And immediately he whispers to me, I didn't want to talk in front of everybody. It was that simple. And she started to giggle. She said, that's exactly how he is. He's very private. So they're like no different than us. When you're channeling a loved one on the other side, they are no different than you and I. And there's going to be times where they feel comfortable talking. Maybe they don't feel comfortable talking to someone, but they'll feel comfortable talking to someone else. And not only that, but some of them are very good at communicating and some of them are not. It's almost like playing the piano. You'll get someone who comes in and plays the piano beautifully. And then you'll get someone who's pounding away on the piano, right? So that can happen as well to spirit. We have to really respect and honor that. The other thing too is you got to be very, very careful about someone who says to you, oh, you've got to curse. I've got to remove it. I had one client, 22 years old, this young girl, and a lady that did a reading for her said that she's got a curse. It's in her stomach. And if she doesn't do something, it's going to go into the stomach of her father and it's going to cause havoc in the family. And so when the girl was talking to me, I said, pray tell. I said, how much to remove this curse? $2,700. I was so disgusted.
That brings up another thing I've been curious about. It seems like there should be licenses for mediums.
Agree.
And when you do something heinous, like that situation you just described, your license is revoked.
There should be accountability.
Yeah.
I know of people who get scammed for $30,000. Let me assure you, a good medium, a good intuitive or a good psychic, they are not going to try to freak you out in any way, shape, or form.
And hopefully those people get outed, because I'm not one of those people that is waving the medium flag. I'm not promoting or trying to discourage anyone, but I think this is a very sensitive topic and people need to be aware of certain things, that it is legitimate, but like you said, you have to be very careful. You're also a Reiki master.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
How does that contribute to the work you do as a medium, and how closely related is it?
Well, first I want to say that I don't practice Reiki. It was something that as I was awakening, I wanted to do things that would develop my skill set. And so I don't formally practice. I just have the certification for it. What it does for me, especially because I'm predominantly clairaudient, it helps me to hear and feel energy, whereas maybe someone else would be able to see it. I won't see it. And so it helps me to hear their soul, to feel their soul. And it also helps me during a reading, because if I've got to do this, Johnny, I made a pact with my guides and the universe that I will do this, but I'm only going to do it if I'm going to be putting someone back on their soul's path. I don't need to delve into their private life, that past stuff. Like, I don't need to impress people with that kind of information. I need to help people with peace and clarity so that they can fulfill their soul's contract and their soul's purpose. And so Reiki assists me. It enables me to do that kind of energy clearing, really without my reader knowing even, and help them to move forward in a positive way.
Soul contracts. I love that concept. Soul contracts conjure that image, at least for me, of someone going into that in-between space, life in between lives, where they go into a soul contract with certain people, a group of people. They agree to come back because they've got stuff to work on. So do you get exposed to a time-space continuum in your work that is different from the way we understand time in a linear fashion?
I'm actually going to simplify it.
It's tricky.
It is. We do come into this realm with a purpose. I deal with a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of educated people. We talk a lot about mindset. Oh, and mindset is the end all and be all for success. Well, I'm going to say no, it's not. It's just a small fragment. If we have a strong mindset, we can succeed, and we're doing a great job at it. But we feel like something is missing. We're not content. We don't feel fulfilled. And sometimes I meet with people and they're in crisis. They're fabulously successful, but they're in crisis, and suddenly their soul is reaching out and saying, excuse me, I'm here and I want to be heard. You were put here for a purpose. And you'll see people who are out there and they'll say, I'm happy with life, but I don't feel like I'm on the right path.
The path.
That's more what I'm referring to. How people experience it is going to be very personal and very different for each. I'm here to help people, to guide them towards that path where their soul is content.
All right. So you don't really get into that space of where you're in the Akashic Records and you can see the past, the present, and the future on some kind of axis. You don't necessarily have anything to do with that.
Not always. Sometimes it depends on who I'm reading and what is needed in that moment. And I recall talking about seeing that on an axle, the way that you explain it. I recall doing a reading many, many years ago, and a young girl came to see me, and she was really, really in distress. She didn't even know where her life was supposed to be moving. I could see her past, and I could see that she was thrown in jail by the man that she loves, who framed her. She had stayed in jail for a good week until they were able to prove her innocent. And that experience was creating such disarray and confusion for her actual soul purpose. And so in that moment, I did see it. I was able to communicate it. I was able to see where she is today and where she is going in the future. Now, what I also experienced was how embarrassed she was that I had seen that. And she said to me, I was hoping and I was afraid that you were going to see it. I was hoping that you would not. That reading was very pivotal for me in my career, because at that point I said, I don't necessarily need to see what's happened to them. I need to know how their soul was feeling in that moment. And from there, I will then take them to the present, where they are today and how they're feeling today and what's happening. And then I will guide them to their future.
When you mentioned this particular girl and you saw her past, that was in the current life. That was not a past life, right?
Correct.
But have you had an experience where you did see someone's past life?
It has happened. It doesn't happen often, but it has happened, especially for people who are living, they don't understand why their life is in such turmoil today, or why they have such bad luck with relationships, or why did their soul guide them to go into a gang, things like that. So it will happen from time to time, yes, but not often.
I suppose that might happen if it's relevant to the current turmoil that they're experiencing now. Very interesting stuff, because it seems like once you kind of wade into the water,
It takes you all over the place.
you think, look, over there it's getting a lot deeper. I can't even see the bottom 20 feet away from me. Do I really want to go there?
And you described that perfectly.
I think it's a proper analogy because a lot of us are fascinated with the unknown. And nowadays, with a lot of people talking about awakening and ascension, raising our vibe, there's also almost like an explosion of psychics and mediums. And
You are so right.
And empaths. I heard the term the other day, the empath Big Bang.
That's interesting.
Do you suppose that has anything to do with ascension or this shift that we're apparently experiencing? Or what exactly is that?
I absolutely do. And I know that you and I, in a previous conversation, we talked about 3D moving towards 5D, you know? And not to be confused what we're referring to when we talk about 3D in this context, we're talking about third dimension and 5 dimension. Not to be confused with density, because there are situations where people describe things as third density, fourth density, and so on. We're strictly referring to 3D. The D being dimension, and the D, of course, referring to spiritual growth. I believe humanity goes into waves, and we were experiencing a lot of 3D. And how do I quickly explain that to our listeners? Well, that's what I call the survival hamster wheel of life. You wake up, you get onto the hamster wheel, and very mindlessly you start just rolling along in that hamster wheel, right? You're not really thinking, you're not really feeling, you're just moving from one thing to another to another. So you wake up, you have maybe a cup of coffee, you get in the car, you go to work, and then you work and you come home and you did the same thing. So you're trapped in this. And this hamster wheel of life filled very much with what I refer to as ego and a lot of self-doubt, low self-esteem, fear, anxiety, where we're really not in tune with who we are as beings. Versus 5D, where we now are moving away from that hamster wheel and you're manifesting things a lot quicker. You're understanding that the universe is here to be of service to you and for you to trust the universe. So you're coming from a place of unconditional love, understanding, forgiveness, awareness that the universe is actually plotting to do you good. So it's actually two different ways of living. When you're in 5D, you're searching for nourishing your soul and doing things that nourish your soul. When you're in 3D, you're only focused on the physical realm, the mindset, and that's it.
I've heard people talk about the great year concept, which sounds very similar to what you are describing. In a nutshell, consciousness goes in cycles up and down like the stock market.
It really does.
And hopefully we are now moving into the rough equivalent of a Bronze Age. I sure hope so, because the last couple of years, it seems like we're hitting bottom.
I know. It feels very painful. It feels very, very
really painful.
People are searching to project certain anger, and others are searching to project love. We can either live in fear or we can live in love. We cannot do both. To just go back to what you had mentioned about an explosion of mediums and psychics.
Is it what we need?
I believe that we are finally realizing that it is a lot more normal than we ever thought. And there's a lot more acceptance. Those of us that are like-minded, and not just like-minded, like-hearted, we're coming together and we're talking, we're sharing experiences. I'm sure some of our listeners will resonate with this when I say that you're sitting there, you're in your office, and someone all of a sudden comes into your office and starts blabbing about a paranormal experience. And they say, oh my goodness, don't tell anybody that I had that experience because they're going to think I'm a whack job, right? But then that other person goes, well, wait a second, I had a similar experience too. So you're not a whack job. I'm there with you. And so people are starting to talk, and we're starting to realize that these experiences that we had in hiding, we were afraid of being judged. We're finding now that we're congregating, we're being pulled together by the universe. We find that it's a lot more common, a lot more natural. I firmly believe as an intuitive medium, you're clairaudient as well. And I believe that the majority of our listeners have some kind of an ability. It's just how we're being called to use it.
Really interesting. I've never heard it explained that way. I always thought that dimension and density were roughly the same thing, but you're saying it isn't.
It's different.
At any rate, in a 5D civilization, these intuitive gifts we're talking about, mediums and empaths and so on, that's normal.
Mm-hmm. It is normal.
One of my favorite illustrations of that is I was told by some people that are firmly in that intuitive empath camp. They have this attraction and this fascination with Egypt. And it was explained to me that some of the pyramids, maybe most of them, were built with telepathy. It wasn't the slave labor as described in the Bible, but this is going back, 10,000 years? It's about the time of the Great Flood, but the more and more we talk about it, it seems like some of our civilizations thousands of years ago did live in that space, but then that frequency peaked and then it went down. Does that make sense?
It completely makes sense. And everything seems to begin and end with Egypt. I just have to have a giggle with you there.
Why is that?
I don't know. I feel drawn to it as well. It's crazy because my daughter and her boyfriend had gone backpacking and Egypt was on their bucket list. And they did actually go into Egypt and they were able to go into a few of the temples, like Isis has a temple, and they were able to go into some of the pyramids as well, as much as, tourism would allow. And because I love Egypt so much, and for some reason I feel drawn to it, they were able to take a different kind of photo with these goggles. All I know is when I put those goggles on and I could see as if I was there, I felt emotional, like that was my home. It was so bizarre. And of course we know that it's resonating with us for a reason. I believe that there's a lot more magic, a lot more to what we know, and it's going to be difficult. Will we ever figure it out? Who knows?
I don't know either, but what I find fascinating about Egypt is that there doesn't seem to be a period of development. They just appeared and they were already very advanced. And of course, we don't have time to go into this now, but there's the connection between Egypt and Atlantis.
Yes.
And it could be that area, that period is where we're going to learn how to get back to where we were.
I agree with you there.
An elevated consciousness, so to speak.
Maybe we'll never know. Maybe those that have gone in there, that have studied, maybe they have information that then maybe they'll never share with us. Who knows? But we do know that there are really interesting markings, really interesting ways of life. Maybe one day we'll get to know the whole picture.
Now, you are preparing to launch your podcast.
Yes.
It's called the Soul Talk Podcast.
Right.
Medium experiences, which sounds very cool.
Thank you.
We hope to hear some episodes where you talk about validation and evidential mediumship and things like that. What other topics might you cover?
I really appreciate you mentioning that because I'm really excited about launching Soul Talk this fall. In my experience, I'm noticing that our soul is undernourished. And so I'll be speaking to people who have dedicated their business to anything that nourishes the soul. Some of my guests are healers, shamans. Some of my guests will be someone who actually came up with a tarot coloring book that you open the page, you color, and you ponder the message of that tarot card that is just opened up in the book. There's so many things that I'll be discussing with various people who've dedicated their lives to nourishing our soul.
Sounds great. That's going to be something definitely worth looking forward to. Scarlet, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
How can our listeners learn more about you online?
They can find me on Facebook or Instagram at Scarlet's Soul Cafe. It's Scarlet with one T. I know sometimes they try to find me with two T's and it's difficult. Or they can send me a message on my website at scarlets-whispers.com.
I will put that link in the show notes as well. You've been listening to Closer to Venus. I'm Johnny Burke. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing. You can also leave us a review on iTunes as well. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.